Okay, please now, Mary, go ahead. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I've now got your screen sharing up. Right, now the peninsula's history is a very, very big subject, and there is no way I can get through everything in the time allotted. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about how the peninsula or the Greenwich Marsh became a rather special place, a rather different place. Then I'm going to follow one theme of industries through. So I'll miss out loads and loads of other industries, and then hopefully throw in a few bits. If I get time to talk about my own experiences in the 80s and 90s or 70s as well, with regeneration on the peninsula, of which I have no pictures whatsoever. However, I'm starting off with the Skinner plan from the 1740s. And it's a very good picture, if you like, of Greenwich Marsh up to the 17th century. Now, can I use my cursor on this? No, I can't. Yes, I can. We've got two or three things here. We've got down here, it says Bendish Sluice, and I'll come back to it in a minute. And that's where Enderby's is now. Over here, we've got the area which is where the pilot is now. And here we've got what's undoubtedly an incursion of floods. Now, we don't know when the peninsula was walled, i.e. that it was cut off from the river and turned into a piece of land, if you like. Probably may have been Roman, may have been medieval, we don't know. Marshes have a particular history. The authority on Marsh history, I'm afraid, was writing in the 1650s. Very good book, which I would recommend. But he tells us how over the centuries, Marsh administration was different to the administration of the parishes. So what we have here are the sluices, which is the drainage ditches. And on the peninsula, they were probably built or rebuilt in the Tudor period, probably under Elizabeth. And we have this bizarre situation where this side pays double the rates. Sorry, that's not a good idea, is it? Double the rates of this side, which are the singles. And as now, Blackwall Lane follows down from East Greenwich, and it carries on up there, and it has another bit up there, which is Marsh Lane. So that is Greenwich Marsh as it was, more or less undeveloped, but with the gunpowder site would have been there by then. I'm not going to talk about that. Right, so here we are. Two things, really. One is here's Bendish Sluice coming out from underneath the Enderby site. And so it did for centuries until Barrett's, I'm afraid, have got rid of it for some reason. That picture is of the Enderby site. I don't know what the date, Stuart will know what date it is, I don't, but it's certainly pre-1900. The other is a more interesting picture from the 17th century, which shows you had to get into a gate to get into the peninsula, the Marsh, and that it had a separate administration. You had down here, you've got St Alfred's Church and the parish, and of course in those days the palace would have been there, and the remains of what was the courthouse for the Ghent administration when Greenwich, this part of Greenwich, was all owned by St Thomas's Abbey in Ghent. But once you were over that stile, you were in a different administration. There was a local authority which was really set up by the votes of the landowners and the occupiers. And they levied a rate called the Woolscot. And that situation continued to the 1890s. But what I wanted to say, really, which is important for regeneration, and we talk about regeneration from this point onwards, is about land ownership. Now, this is one of my murkier attempt at a bit of artwork and analyses at the time of the tithes in 1847 who owned the land. Most of it is in corporate ownership. Now, there are some names on that, which are odd plots owned by people who were investors very largely. There are some colours which I haven't shown in. There's the Angerstein section owned by the Angerstein family. But the ones I've highlighted are owned by big local charities. There is another charity which owns a bit, but not very much. Hatcliffe, which still owns a lot of what's shown there. Trinity College, who still own what was there. And of course, Magdalen College, who owns and still have control, I think, over a great deal of the West Bank. This whole middle section down here is what is generally called now the Peninsula. And it was an area which was purchased by British Gas, South Metropolitan Gas Company, in the 1880s. And just go back again, sorry about that. Other corporate owners. But Magdalen College, and I'm assuming people know what I mean by Magdalen College, I'll talk a bit about it, own a huge section. And what I'm going to say is that when we get into the 1830s, 1840s, when they begin to see industrial expansion as important. So all of those bright red squares were gradually leased out to various industries. And that is the start of what I would see as regeneration. They don't do it any differently to the way that developers work now. So at Magdalen College, in case you don't know Magdalen College, that's a very nice painting of it. It's over in the far corner of Blackheath, Sir John Magdalen, and there is a long saga about the ownership of the local manors, but Sir John Magdalen gets a lot of land in Greenwich, not just on the peninsula, but up in West Greenwich. And he sets up this almshouse in on the borders of Blackheath. And as I always say, he left in his will that he, the college was to be for impoverished Turkey merchants, i.e. Turkey merchants who, for whatever reason, their ship had sunk or something. So it was to be managed by the Turkey Company. And if the Turkey Company fell, it was to be managed by gentlemen of the East India Company. And when the East India Company fell, they were to be managed by gentlemen of the Corporation of the City of London. And they, of course, have it now. And I think the management body is nearly all ex-Lord Mayors. If the City Corporation of the City of London falls, said Sir John, it's been managed by 8 discreet gentlemen of the county of Kent. So Magdalen College has managed those plots on the peninsula since 1680 and continues to do so. I mean, they've sold some plots and bought others. It's more complicated than that. So here we are. They have a wonderful archive in Magdalen College. It's one of the great things in Greenwich, which nobody seems to really know about. And those are 2 plans from it. And you see that they are marked up as plots and for development. And each of those plots would have been given to a head leaseholder. Magdalen Wharf, for example, was sold to a man called leased to a man called Holcomb, who then divided into smaller plots and leased them out to various industrialists. And Magdalen College kept a close eye on who he was letting to, and they kept a close eye on the architectural standards of everything that was built. At the same time, and I put this picture of Pelton Road in, some of the earliest developers in the 1840s let a huge area out for Magdalen College for housing. It's now generally called the Magdalen College Estate and was managed by Magdalen College until 1980, perhaps a bit later, 85. when it was passed to Hyde housing. The roads are all named after collieries, or were originally, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But they were built for Morton College by the Morton College architect, and they kept a very close eye on the building standards. In fact, some places they're required to come down. Most of them are quite small, but they're now not cheap in the way of properties. So what I thought I would talk about was to carry on with a theme of coal on the peninsula and how various industries are affected. So we have coal, which is coming down largely from Durham. Some of it's coming down from Newcastle and Blythe, most of it from Durham. I just put these round. This is not a Greenwich picture at the top here. The coal tax posts, which circle London, all the way around, and all of the roads into London, there's a coal tax post. And every vehicle or whatever bringing coal past that post had to pay a tax to the City of London. And they had to go to the coal exchange to pay it. And a lot of that money, of course, went eventually to free up the tolls on London's private bridges and to build the free crossings, which we have got now, hopefully. So hundreds and hundreds of ships are coming down from the north every day, clogging up the Thames. And that's an older picture, but believe me, they were still coming in the early 80s, bringing coal down from Durham to the industries of London. Just off Charlton, down just at the end of Anchor and Hope Lane, in the 19th century, was this thing that I always think looks like a big accident. It's a coal shipment station, I suppose you call it, which is run by quarries, who of course are still down there, still got their dry dock down in Charlton. And it is where ships from the north can unload their coal into barges in the middle of the river. And it's called Atlas because a series of hulks called Atlas were there. There were 3 Atlases eventually, and I'm sure it wasn't quiet. And if people complain to me about the noise of the river, they should have been a bit near Atlas. Finally, I put there the harbour master's house in on Ballast Quay. It was the second harbour master's house. The previous one had been at the bottom end of Eastney Street at a pub. And this was purpose-built, and it's about regulation of the river. And the harbour master is, they're filtering the coal ships as they come up. They're trying to stop them coming up. They're trying to tell them which wharves they've got to go to, and they're only letting a few through at a time to aid congestion. Congestion of coal coming down from London, from the north, is a big problem. Right, so Morton College decided to lease out a part of its estate nearest to Greenwich, nearest to Ballast Quay, and to use it as coal staiths. And they got this chap, aptly named Cole's Child, to develop what the area we now call Riverside Gardens. It's quite a complicated area. He had part of it, the deeds up there. It was previously Dog Kennel Field, and he divided it up into various areas. His own wharf, which is there, is Charles Wharf. Stone Wharf, which became Granite Wharf, which is where Tarmac, of course, was still bringing boats up into the, well into the 2000s and onto that wharf. And where it says July 1838 was a series of barge builders, but ultimately pipers. So Cole's Child worked as a developer on this. He also worked as a developer on the housing at the back, which, as I said, is all called after colliery names. And I've put a picture of Pelton Colliery there so that you can see you know, that it really did. There really was a Pelton. I mean, there still is a Pelton, but there's a golf course on the colliery site now. There was also West Pelton. And Cole's child himself lived in Bromley, in what is now Bromley Civic Centre, when it was the Bishop's Palace. And there's an amazing monument to him in Bromley Parish Church. But he was a hop merchant and a paint merchant, and generally fairly ruthless. But he is the first person to come in as part of the development process. Right, so we have to think about what the coal is used for. And of course, it isn't just domestic coal, there's some of that, but most of it is going to power industry. I put at the top here something which I won't have time to talk about, I don't think, round by the pilot, but just down from the pilot was a huge tide mill. It's a mill which is worked by the power of water, the incoming tide. And there was in 1803 an accident with a steam engine, in the boiler of a steam engine by Trevithick, Richard Trevithick. And the accident, although it was not Trevithick's fault, did in a lot of ways change the history of the steam engine. And the sort of sold, the ones were sold and so on. There was a big press campaign to rubbish him as a result of this accident. But it was on the Greenwich Riverside, 1803. And I put a couple of pictures of two late 19th century factories down. You see the sort of Mumber smokestacks. This top one is Appleby, who were engineering company down at what is now the it's beside down near the Blackwall Tunnel entrance. And it had been the Bessemer site. The Bessemer previously had on it a converter and a rolling mill. But there are what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chimneys there, and there had been another one which was demolished. Below that is the Morden Wharf site of the cable works. And again, there's a lot of chimneys there and a lot in the background. So, you know, all of that coal is powering an awful lot of pollution, I should say, but also it's powering an awful lot of industry. And I put at the bottom to remember that on a lot of these industries, it's not just using the coal, they're providing equipment. And that is a picture of Appleby Brothers, whose factory is up here. And it's a boiler entrance, which it's down in Australia, taken of a steam engine made by Appleby, which is now was made to power an Australian waterworks. Right, and there were various other things. Now, tar spirit. This site is largely about somebody called Joshua Taylor Beale, who I would happily talk a lot about. Every now and again, you'll get every slide saying, well, I could talk for 20 minutes on this one. Well, I could talk probably 40 minutes on Joshua Taylor Beale. He started off in Whitechapel, making this lamp with naphtha, which is tar spirit evaporate. And he then came to Greenwich, apparently for the Enderby family. Now, this picture is the river, showing the Enderby factory down on the Marsh on its own, but the chimney is almost certainly belongs to Beale Foundry, which was next to it. And the Enderbys seem to have worked with Beale on tar spirit. And what then was cutting edge technology about discovering how rubber could be used in various ways and how tar spirit was the way emulsifying it to make it usable. And that he was also undoubtedly helping them in various ways in which they could produce different sorts of rope. And incidentally was advised by Michael Faraday. And down here, this is just taken from a plan of the Enderby site showing the rope works. And the rope works is in itself a big, big story. But Beale went on, and he eventually patented this exhauster, which is a sort of pump for gases, and which eventually, and there's a whole saga about all this, which is actually quite amusing, and about the fact it turned out that Mr. Beale wasn't married to Mrs. Beale, but we don't go into that. But it did affect the patents, and his son sold the original patent to Brown Donkin factory, which by then had gone to Chesterfield. And Chesterfield's Donkin factory sold exhausters for many, many, many years. And I mean, the Donkin factory was sold only 10 years ago. Another one went to another pump manufacturer who doesn't seem to have exploited it. But it's how various bits of technology from the use of coal are developed by people like Beale, who's a demented engineer and who developed other things, that manages to use some of that coal, and it was used on Greenwich Marsh for various factories and various applications. Right, now we get to tar processing, which is a big thing, and I'm not going into much detail about it. Some of the earlier works, which were from people like Holcomb, Morden Wolf, for the developers on what we now call Victoria Wolf, were distilling tar for various reasons and selling it. There was even one works, quite the early one, Willis and Wright, who were connected with the Old Street vinegar works. And I've only just realized had found a cheap and nasty way of making vinegar, or mock vinegar, which I probably won't go into. I just don't think about it. But a big one is Bethel, who did actually develop this means of impregnating wood with tar. And it's a big development, and he's not the only person doing it, of course. But all of the things we take for granted made of wood, which need to stand in the open air and be preserved, are down to this process. Railway sleepers, telegraph poles, wood paving, which I'll come back to. And there were many others. There was a lot of these works on Greenwich Marsh. I put at the bottom here the Leonard Still, which I'll come back to. I don't know the date of that photograph, but the Leonard Still was installed in the 1880s by a firm called Forbes Abbott, who'd moved down to Greenwich from Hackney Wick. And it is a continuous tar distilling process. I've only just found a document which actually describes it in detail, but I will come back to it. I've never found out who Leonard was. I'd be very interested to know. Right, other ways in which tar is used. I decided I wasn't going to talk about the cable industry, but this is a very nice picture of a nice young man using tar in various ways in the manufacture of cables, which I'm sure Stuart's out there and he'll be delighted to tell you what the young man is doing. Soap, Wilkie and Soames, the huge soap works, which was on the site, which is now, of course, a part of Morden Wolf. Coal tar soap. They were making British Carbolic down there. And I keep trying to explain to people, it's not, if you're in the early 20th century, you're interested in getting rid of the germs. You don't care what nasties are in the soap. It's the germs which it's killing, which you're interested in. And then something produced by the gas industry itself to sell, a tar-based disinfectant. And of course, in those days, children with whooping cough would be taken down to the gasworks and hung over something suitably smelly in order to clear their lungs. But there's a whole sort of medical stuff here, which is, what are we doing? So, right, now this is, I think, quite interesting. This was quite a big works up at the near Point Wolf. Point Wolf is where magazine, I think, is now. And it's about road blocks. Road surfaces made up of blocks of wood. And there's a whole load of people here who are supposed to have been doing it. But a sign, which I think must date from the 70s, possibly later, because I was given that photograph by the tourist who took it, improved wood pavement. And here they are down in Nelson Road, installing it. I had, if this was, it is a live talk, but if you were people out there and I was an audience in a hall, I have actually got some wood blocks which I would happily pass around, but I can't do that on the screen. Right, now this is one of the most interesting things and something which I could talk about for hours. In fact, I've been editing today the book I'm writing about the gas industry and what went on here. This is Frank Hills, the man. Frank Hills had the big site, which is now got all flats on it, but is the site opposite, on the other side of the road from the pilot. Frank Hills is always called the Deptford chemist. And when he died, there were little notes in the paper saying the Deptford chemist has died, and oh dear. And when they read his will, they discovered about a fortnight later that he was one of the richest men in England, one of the 10 richest men in England. And they all changed their mind and started writing obituaries to him. Frank Hills made money out of lots of things. And one of the things I've been reading today is about how he went to the House of Lords for the salt industry, the Cheshire salt industry, which he seems to have controlled. But he made money out of the process of cleaning up coal gas from gasworks, which smelt too bad to be in people's houses, but which he had patented a process which removed the smell. Now, by saying he patented it, does not mean he'd invented it. He just got the patent office fast. And the idea is, you see, that once he's got this stuff and they've removed the smell, that the ingredients of the smell are very valuable and that he's selling them off quickly. And he had mines in Spain, mines in Wales, all sorts of things. The salt industry, which I'm still trying to find out about. And he had lots of brothers and uncles and things, and they all had different bits of the works. What I've put at the bottom here is, oh, goodness me, sorry about that again. What I put at the bottom here is his brother's works at a place I can never pronounce, on the top end of Anglesey, Amlach. But at the centre of Anglesey is a very large heap of minerals called Paris Mountain, which Frank and his brothers were busy mining. But this works, which was took up a very great deal of space, and which, I mean, I've been all over the site at different times with a very nice man who's written a book about it, that was processing gas industry waste from the Midlands and from the Northwest generally. So here's Frank, who made an awful lot of money out of the remains, the waste products of coal being turned into coal gas. And he was also, and this is a diversion, a big diversion, which I'm going to get into trouble for. He also, on the other side of the river from where Millennium Village is now, was Thames Ironworks. You've got to remember that London's shipbuilding industry was massive throughout the 17th and 18th, early 19th centuries, really, really massive. And the premier company was Thames Ironworks, and Thames Ironworks built battleships, it built flagships of extremely. Now, minute books are missing quite a period of it, and that is the period at which Frank Hills was chair. Now, I'm just going to go a little bit off the subject, but just across the Millennium Village, this vessel was built. I don't know if people know her. She's birthed at Portsmouth because she's at home in Portsmouth, and she's preserved ship you can go around. If you can imagine a ship of this size being built just the other side of the river, technically in Essex, for the Millennium Village. And the thing about it, she might have been built technically in Essex, but nearly all of the very, very high-tech equipment on her, 1869, came from Greenwich and Blackheath and Deptford. I mean, her very, very state-of-the-art engines built by Penn's on Blackheath Hill, her specially designed gunnery, which she's built to be frightening, that's what she's about, all comes from the Royal Arsenal, of course, instrumentation coming from places in Greenwich, a lot of her ancillary work done by Stones at Deptford and Charlton, of course. And I keep going on about this, but this very, very high-tech vessel, which is 10 years older than Cutty Sark. I'm not pretending Cutty Sark isn't high-tech, she's different. This ship, which is sitting down in Portsmouth, and I guess hardly anybody in Greenwich knows about. But the things on her, including they had washing machines on her. It's 1869, and she is the result of the skills of Greenwich workmen and designers and people from South London generally. That's what went into her. Yet we don't celebrate those at all. We prefer to look at a sailing ship built in Scotland. And I mean, I'm going to say something else about that in a moment. Right, we're coming down to more modern use of coal for power. This is Blackwall Point Power Station. I don't know the date of this, but I guess it's about 1970. We've got here the jetty, which of course is now a horticultural project. So the jetty is still there. The two gas holders up here, so we can position us where we are. The pilot will be about there just off the screen. There's an amazing building around here, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. The park life video is shot down this section here. And I mean, if I had time, I could show you the stills of where it was. It's the second power station on the site. It's built in 1947. All of this stuff up here is the remains of Frank Hill's chemical works, which was taken over by the gas industry, South Metropolitan Gas, as their chemical works. I want to point something else out to you. People who don't remember the village before 2000, that is a railway line, which was destroyed by the people who built the dome because they didn't think people would want to come in by train. And a lot of us made a big fuss about the fact that this railway line, which went straight up to the dome, was destroyed, which it was. You see it there, and there's other pictures in a minute. So we have East Greenwich Gasworks and South Metropolitan Gas Company, and that's George Livesey. Now, George Livesey is somebody I could talk about for a couple of hours, so I'm not going to say very much, except he was an extraordinary man who dominated the gas industry throughout the late 19th century, really, and changed it. He changed its finances, and he changed the whole way it was managed. And he was hated, absolutely hated by most other gas companies. So East Greenwich is built, I think, as the most modern gasworks ever built in Britain. It's built in the late 1880s. And this picture of it is a complete lie because, you know, they thought they were so wonderful. If you look at those two holders, think where the holder that's just come down is, it should be about there. Because there's a couple of factories and things on that riverside. But they would prefer you to think it filled the whole thing up. So they moved in. They had to get a House of Lords judgment to get permission to build it. And it was going to be a showplace, an absolute showplace. Lives's standards were so high, and he was going to show the rest of the world how you built a perfect gasworks. This is East Greenwich. People were proud of working there. I mean, even when I moved to Greenwich in the late 60s, gas industry workers considered themselves a bit above everybody else, you know. I mean, it wasn't, particularly if they worked down here. I mean, they thought they were something, and they looked down, really, really looked down on people who worked at the Sydenham gasworks. Oh, no. So, the gas holders, again, I'm not going on about them. Clearly, I could talk for hours about the gas holders that were down at East Greenwich. How are we doing time, right? That top picture is an advertisement by South Metropolitan for the gas holders in the 1930s. And it, again, is so typical of South Met. I mean, look at the size of them compared to that factory chimney. They wanted you to know their holders were bigger and better, and that they were the most important gas company there ever was, and some justification. Directly below it, of course, is our poor, late lamented East Greenwich number 1, built to very high standards, but too close to a copy of number 13 at Old Kent Road to manage to get it listed. I know Malcolm's out there listening to this. He's probably going to disagree with what I'm going to say. But this is number 2, East Greenwich number 2, probably the biggest gas holder ever built in Europe, much bigger than number 1. I think that if this holder had been the one that, because it was demolished in 1985. If it hadn't been demolished, we would have stood a much better chance of getting it listed, because it had so many unusual features. It has this thing called a flying lift above it, which I think, hopefully Malcolm's muted, I think was only the second holder to have a flying lift, the first one at Rotherhithe. And of course it's built as one is, with a specially designed tank, because it's on the Marsh and they have a problem with water incursion. I think this is about to be used as what this tank it's sitting in, as the entrance point for the wretched Silvertown Tunnel. So let's see. Where are we going from here? Yes, Ordnance Wharf. Right at the end of the peninsula was the gas industry's tar works. Now, I'm not going to say very much. I've got hundreds and hundreds of tar works pictures if anybody's interested. And I showed them to a lot of gas engineers up in Manchester about 10 years ago. And they were all absolutely raving over the pictures of the tar, which all to me all look the same, and I'm sure to most of you would. Lots of pictures like this. This is the tar pit. It all looks a terrific mess, and you know, there's clearly a whole lot of things going on there. There's also a lot of pictures of these tar spraying vehicles on the roads, a lot of pictures of roads and showing how the tar was laid and so on. And a friend of mine, again, took a lot of these and has since written a bit about them. He says that in the laboratories at South Metropolitan, at East Greenwich, there were men who could distinguish between 96 different types of tar. Now, this bottom picture, which I'm going to do another diversion away from the coal theme, is of the, I don't know if you can see it clearly enough, it's of the gateway into Ordnance Wharf. Now we need to think, why is it called Ordnance Wharf? And if you see, there's a whole pile of things stacked up. And if you look close, you can see their gun barrels. And when South Metropolitan bought the site, they collected up all the gun barrels which were lying around and put them on the gateway as a decorative feature. They sold them in the 1970s for scrap. I am told they're probably worth about 50,000 each now. So why are the gun barrels there? This is going to be a quick little thing on the a different subject because I think it's an interesting one and one I could have followed through. Now, this is a building which was going up in the 1860s. I don't think it was ever finished. At the end of Ordnance Wharf. This is where the posh hotel is, up at the end of the peninsula, and where there's a jetty, which I think there's plans for turning it into a riverboat jetty. Good luck to them. And that, of course, was the jetty for Ordnance Wharf. Now, I think, I know, I'm certain that is Alexander Theophilus Blakely. That, I think, is Henry Bessemer. Not sure. I have no idea who that is, or that is. Now, there's a whole saga about this, which I can't bear to go into all the details. But Henry Bessemer, who is not supposed to have done anything outside Sheffield, of course, lived in South London. And he had a Greenwich Works. I have never seen a biography of Bessemer or a talk about Bessemer, anything that mentions his Greenwich Works, although it's very, very well documented. Embarrassingly so, really, if you come to what the Lino Company said about it. Bessemer had a big row with the Royal Arsenal, with William Armstrong, who had the enviable joint position of being an arms manufacturer at Elswick in Newcastle and being the government procurer of arms designs. And he had thrown out Bessemer, and he then threw out Blakely. And they came down here and started to build this gun foundry. Now, what happened, and this gets worse and worse and worse, it turns out that Blakely was funded by the China House of Dent. Now, if you read about the Opium Wars, China House of Dent features quite largely. They were a British bank and possibly the largest opium dealers in the world. And the Chinese government was not happy with them. So there was bank collapse, and Blakely and Bessemer couldn't finish this works. Bessemer, of course, went on to become a national hero. Blakely went to Peru, where he died of cholera in the arms of somebody else's wife. We'll go into that. So that is Point Wharf, which is where Magazine is now, really. What we also had at that end of the peninsula, which is a slightly different subject, is this huge dry dock. You can still see the slight indent where it went in on the riverside, but the dome was built on top of it. And when we asked the archaeologists, did you find the dry dock when you were digging up there? They said that we saw a lot of concrete, we didn't know what it was. So much for archaeologists, really. But this was owned by a company called Stockwell and Lewis. There are a number of ships built there around the world. Here and there are wrecks, really. But the House of Lords required South Metropolitan Gas Company to buy it, which they did before the gasworks was built, on the grounds that the smell would upset the fancy paintwork on the ships. And they, South Met spent the next 60 years trying to get rid of it and couldn't, and gave up and used it as a sort of storage tank for Ordnance Wharf Tire Works. Fast forward to my little life. By the time we got to the 1980s, there was a thick wood down where the gasworks had been. I mean, it was really thick woodland, lots of interesting wildlife too. And a whole lot of people wanted it kept like that, and bother the dome. And I had broken in under the fence one day. I came across this capstan, which is a very early wooden capstan, and it had definitely come from the dry dock. I've seen since pictures of it, which the gas company used as a decorative feature. There were lots of really nasty lorries around, and I rang up the museum in Docklands, and they came in the night with a lorry. It is now, as far as I know, it's a major feature on one of their floors. But last time I went, they hadn't quite got round to the idea there was a gasworks in Greenwich. They couldn't think beyond Beckton, I'm afraid. But that picture, of course, is quite clearly has the gas holder on it. Right. How are we doing for time? I'll get a move on. This is Phoenix Wharf, which is the old Frank Hill site, his chemical works, which was bought by South Metropolitan Gas and which lasted really up until almost the 1880s as a chemical manufacturing area. I put here a picture of one of the more amazing buildings which was on the peninsula until relatively recently. I can't remember, it was demolished, I think 97 or 98. And this was the 1957 sulfate store. It was amazing. To go into that building was like, it would take a breath away. It was so majestic inside. Very much used for a lot of pop videos and a lot of sort of, Dempsey and Makepeace type stuff. A Doctor Who episode was filmed there. Of course, it was too recent to get it listed. And we were trying to get an exemption through English Heritage. And they would like to grant it, but the gas industry got a whiff of it along with the dome and had it down in 2 days. I mean, it was a very, very remarkable building. And of course, the jetty, the gasworks, bits of which are still there. It's on the site of where the QE, isn't called QE, whatever it calls itself, Riverboat Pier is. And the Cornwall statue is on one of these thingies. And the whole lot of shipping. South Met had a fleet of, I think, usually 4 or 5 colliers coming down on a daily basis from Durham, from the stays at Durham and Blythe with coal for the gasworks. They owned this fleet. In the Great War, they lost their fleet twice over by torpedoes, including a flagship which they'd had built, which was built to outrun the torpedo. And I mean, we're coming up to Remembrance Day, and I mean, I think, and a lot of people saying about the men of the Merchant Marine who, generally were looked down on because they weren't in the forces. But there were men who went down on these ships on 3 occasions, pulled out of the water, and went back. And the constant flow of these ships, it wasn't just South Met had them. There was another lot went into Becht, and it was owned by what became North Gas, West Gas, and the Wandsworth Works, of course, which was separate, had its own fleet with funnels which could be pulled down, so they went under the bridges. They were still coming up in the 70s and 80s. And of course, there was also an independent coal light works, which was just at the back of the pilot, and the Fuel Research Institute, which has started off as a poison gas research establishment in the Great War, and was, I think, probably still exists in one of these government laboratories somewhere in the Midlands, but I'm not sure. But it was researching into all sorts of ways in which coal and coal substitutes could be used. Very interesting and important and very secret organisation. We're nearly there. So, looking at what I've missed out, the whole of the Enderby Wharf thing, which you can listen to Stuart on because he knows infinitely more than I do, as does Alan Bucket-Gray. In fact, everybody does. And I put that in because it shows the vast new flats behind Enderby House and how we worked so hard only a couple of years ago to see that Enderby House wasn't demolished by the developers who'd left it to become a ruin. It had been used as offices until bought up by a developer, and within a year, it wasn't fit for anything. So I also put a little bit about some of the shipping. There was shipping and barge building. Blackadder I put down because she's Cutty Sark's sister ship. I wrote about her a couple of weeks ago in my Weekender series, and I've also written about her sister ship, Halloween. Very, very fast, like Cutty Sark, very, very fast, much faster than anything that's moving in the way of goods transport on the water these days. Constantly breaking records. I mean, all of these and a few others You know, they're going round the world, light, fast cargoes, cheap to run, and breaking speed records and coming up the Thames. You know, hi, I know I've done it in less than anybody else has ever done it before. I put Giralda down because there was 3 very large barge building establishments in the peninsula, and numbers of others which we don't know about because they left no records. I've seen Giralda on all sorts of things, placemats and so on. She was built to win prizes. She was very bad at carrying bricks and rubbish and other stuff that the barges usually took, but she did win every race she was entered for. Giralda, of course, is a thing in Spain. And to say something about the spritsail barge, you know, and how practical, sensible, cheap they are. And I understand some are currently being built and good. And no, let's go back. You didn't see that slide. If I'm coming to the end of a talk about the peninsula, and I've been mentioning shipbuilding, and the last big talk I did was about shipbuilding only. And I would say to the audience, and you can't shout at me, when do you think the last, the latest vessel of any size was built in the peninsula, not the rowing boats, it was something a bit bigger. And people sit there and one people say 1920 and somebody else say it might have been 1940. And I say, 1991. New Orleans, I mean, she's not, you know, a great big ocean going vessel, but she's not small. She's based up at Reading, built by Joe Jacubates, Point Wharf, which is where the upside down electricity pylon is, in 1991. I must admit that I tried to interview Joe Jacubates around that time, and he agreed. And I rang him up, and he said, "Oh, can't torture now, love. Bailiffs is here." So anyway, that is something which East Greenwich produced in the 1990s. And this is a picture taken overnight, about 1998. Not that good a picture. From near where my home is, with the gas holder and the dome being built. And I'm not going to sit and talk about the whole regeneration thing, as I did have a bit of a ringside seat to it because I was working for an organisation which monitored regeneration in East London and produced a monthly pack of information. And then as soon as I retired, I went on the council, so I got for the peninsula another ringside seat to it all. The question, hold on. You know, is who is it for and what is it for, I suppose, but not something to go into now, except I would like to courage, and perhaps I might have it, to write to Michael Heseltine and ask him why Greenwich was removed from the Doctor's Development Scheme. So I think that's probably it if I want to hand it back to Alan. Can I do that? Oh, and can I just say, don't try and talk to me. I am so deaf, I can hear almost nothing. And I would be grateful if any questions were written. Can I hand it back to you, Alan?
Yes, please.
What do I have to do? I'll get rid of this.
Yep.
Stop share. Go on.
Thank you, Mary. Can you hear me?
Yes, just
excellent.
With difficulty.
Okay, we've had some questions. If people are watching, there's if you hover your mouse down to the bottom middle of the screen, there's a little thing saying chat. You go onto that, and then you can see the questions. So somebody said, I will read them out so everyone can see them. But let me start with a question. Somebody said, "Is the peninsula owned by the Corporation of London?" I said no.
I don't know who owns it. It's basically, I think, owned by the Greater London Authority, certainly not by the corporation. I understood that the Dome was owned by Christchurch, Oxford, but all of them have layers of leases. You know, I think there's the freeholder, I think is GLA, not for the modern college sites, but for the the old gasworks and the steelworks as well. I think the gasworks must have bought the steelworks site up. Steelworks is the back behind the dome, behind the pilot. And then it's been leased off to various people who again lease it. There's sort of tiers of leases. But Christchurch, Oxford, I was told years ago owned the dome, but I don't know if that's true anymore.
Right. Somebody else has said, what is the name of the ship in Portsmouth that you showed? The Greenwich built ship.
I can't hear. See, let me see.
The ship in Greenwich, the ship that you showed a picture of that's in Greenwich.
Which one?
The one in, sorry, the one that's now in Portsmouth.
That's the Warrior. She's
Warrior.
She's not in Greenwich. She was built the other side of the river from the Millennium Village on Bow Creek, but on the Essex side.
Right.
And she's now in. I mean, I think that picture was taken up in I would say Bishop Auckland. I can't remember. But she was done up and regenerated up in the northeast somewhere, which is when I saw her originally.
You made a lovely remark earlier about the noise when you were talking about the atlases. I was born and grew up in Goole. Can you hear me?
Yes, sort of. But I was talking about Atlas.
The atlases, yeah, and I grew up in Goole, very close to the docks, and the noise of the Tom Puddings being unloaded in the middle of the night into the colliers was just amazing. And I still remember that, waking up at 3 a.m, hearing the noise of this coal. So yes, the life was noisy in the 50s. Any more questions? Somebody says, Roberta says,
I'd be grateful in what Malcolm thinks about East Greenwich number 2, but he seems to have turned himself off.
I've put my microphone on if you want to speak to me.
Go on, Malcolm. Yeah, turn your mic on.
I have. What is the question?
Would you think that East Greenwich number 2 would have been more listable than East Greenwich number 1?
I think you're probably right, yes. But the question is whether it would be listable at all, because they set themselves having any more listings, you see. So if it had survived, it would have been another embarrassment. But at least it would have been recorded pretty fully as a major site. Archaeologically, had it survived.
I can't hear, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. I think Malcolm said yes, it might have. Philippa says, the Warrior is a must. It's she's from the Isle of Wight, so it is near where the Warrior is. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Any more questions, everybody?
Alan?
Yes.
Mary mentioned right at the beginning of her presentation a picture of the sluice gate alongside the factory at Enderby Wharf, and she said she didn't know the date of the picture. It was 1886.
Is that Stuart?
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew you'd know.
Thanks, Stuart.
I should have pointed out the buildings with the gutta percha leaves on it as well, but I thought, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, in fact, the sluice is still there, but they've realigned the gating and hidden it, so that Bendish Sluice still comes out into the river there, but it's.
Oh, I didn't know that. I assumed
part of the redevelopment. They had to make sure that they still contained the waterway, so it is there, but you can't see it anymore.
There was a penstock for a long time, which got removed.
Any more questions, anybody? Asking once, asking twice, asking 3 times. Someone says, are there any interesting connections between Charlton, Riverside and the Peninsula? Well, as I said a month ago, and Stuart will no doubt say in a month's time, the telecom cable industry, of course, straddled both and were both owned by Telcon at one stage. Any Charlton Riverside connections you can think of, Mary?
I mean, the Riverside Path, obviously. Now there's developers, some of the same developers. But I mean, I think you and I own quite a bit of the Charlton site, certainly, as well as Morden Wharf. But otherwise, I mean, it's a continuum all the way along, really, except, of course, that once you get past Lombard Wall, it's a different parish, so that the rules change a bit.
Right.
I can add a little bit to the telecommunications story.
Yeah, go on, Stuart.
They both made submarine cables. Telcon was founded in 1864 by merging the Gutta Percha Company, a Glass Elliott and Company, which was on the Enderby Wharf site, and Morden Wharf. And in 1863, William Siemens came over and built the start of what became the Siemens factory. And they were the biggest competition with one another, and effectively all the other major submarine cable companies in Great Britain, which were the only ones in the world until the end of the 19th century, went out of business, leaving them in competition. And the most significant part of that competition was that Telcon, as it was the main supplier to the Eastern Telegraph Company, which was effectively international telecommunications going out to all parts of the British Empire and anywhere else the country had commercial or diplomatic interests. But because of that, Siemens became the preferred supplier for the General Post Office, which was effectively domestic telecommunications and short trips to Europe. And they competed with one another until they merged into Submarine Cables Limited in the 1930s.
During the recession, I guess, because...
Well, plus the effect of Marconi on the market for submarine cables.
Yeah, radio killed the submarine business for a bit. Like satellites.
This is not about telecommunications, but the thing which divides Greenwich and Charlton, of course, is the Augustine line. And the railways that went off it, most of them went to the Charlton direction. Big line, big connections going down to the big glassworks in Charlton and so on. Whereas at Greenwich, it was really only that line that went up to where the dome is that went in that direction. But the Augustine line opened up both Charlton and Greenwich Marsh to rail transport. And I think that's important. Of course, it's very much still there.
Yep, it emerges onto the main line at Westcombe Park, just about.
Yes, that's right. There's a moment, there's all sorts of goings on. I don't know where we are. I was on to Greenwich Council solicitors about it quite recently, that the railway's trying to close their re-signalling project means that the positioning of the trains is going to be changed. It's all a great complicated thing.
Oh, right, okay.
My few messages, it says.
Any more messages?
Clarity. Carol, yes, I know about ropers. I've not put that in. There's, if you email me, I can send you what I know. But I think what I know is going to be in the Greenwich Heritage Collection, and you won't be able to look at it because of what's going on there. The railway, the railway going through the peninsula, there is an article by somebody called Malcolm Millichip about it, which I've probably got a copy of, again, if you email me. Pilot was a pub. Yes. Well, I would hope the Pilot dates from 1803. It's built as part of the tide mill that was down there. Interesting building, really, but has been managed to get itself unlistable by its the alterations to it. No, I don't think there is any room for a Charlton Athletics, sorry.
Right, we've always got somebody worrying about Charlton. Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm going to say thank you very much to Mary. Tomorrow, this is being recorded in the cloud. I will download that tomorrow and then record it and put it up on the Facebook group for the Greenwich Industrial History Facebook group. You will be able to watch it there again. And that should be fairly clear. And the next one, you've just seen Stuart. Oh, Mary, you were very modest and you didn't talk about your book, which is there. If you want more, Mary has published a book called Greenwich Peninsula. There we are, both of them. Right.
It's from Amazon.
Right. It's only available from Amazon, so
yes, I've got a few copies, but I mean, I wouldn't sell them, no. But I can probably arrange deals, but I can't do it easily. I mean, Amazon clearly, want it. Well, they're not in. They publish it for nothing, and then they take the money. It's a deal.
There we are. And of course, if we were in a real meeting, we'd have a little pile of them, and you'd be able to buy a signed copy. But we'll have to wait till the vaccine is in operation. The other thing is, Stuart, who you saw briefly a few minutes ago, will be talking on the 8th of December. He mentioned the Eastern Telegraph Company. I'm just looking at my notes. 8th of December at the same time, 7:15 we meet and 7:30 we start talking. And he's going to be talking about the Greenwich built cable that connected directly to India 150 years ago this year. Stuart was going to talk live in June, I think it was. And of course, the virus have stopped that. So he's in the last few weeks of the year, he's going to be talking about the Red Sea line to India, because it goes along the Red Sea. So with that, thank you all very much. And I think, how many people have we got? We got about 60 at the peak, 65 at the peak, which was great. It's about twice as many as we get squashed into the old bakery in Blackheath. So that's a great, creditable number. Thank you very much.
I'm just looking down who was there. There's no, what have you done with my router, Roger? I don't think he's there.
Right.
Oh, okay. Susan. Susan's all the way from Toronto.
Yeah. Susan tried to log on 2 hours early, got the time difference wrong.
Yeah, hi Mary.
Hiya, nice to see you.
Good, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, this was good. I enjoyed it.
Give all up to Toronto, we have family there.
But we have 22 degrees here today.
It was what?
We have 22 degrees here today.
Wow.
It's warm, yeah.
So is that Fahrenheit or centigrade?
Oh, come on.
Canada does centigrade, Stuart. You know better than that.
Well, if you just go over the border to ex-Trump land, it's Fahrenheit.
I know. And they were even talking about, the vaccine, keeping it at minus something Fahrenheit. I thought, what is that? The scientists. Anyway, let's not go there. Okay, Mary, thank you very much indeed, all of you, for your excellent presentation, Mary. Thank you for all attending. And I will close the meeting at that point. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Goodbye.
Bye.